Rick Rubin has spent 40 years in rooms where creative breakthroughs happen. He produced the Beastie Boys' debut album when he was 21. He helped Johnny Cash reinvent himself. He sat across from Jay-Z, Adele, and Metallica at the exact moment something clicked. But a creative breakthrough happened in a room with Rick Rubin that had nothing to do with music. And it might be the most important session he's ever hosted. On his podcast Tetragrammaton, Rubin brought together two people who should have been natural allies but instead created one of the most uncomfortable and revelatory conversations in health science. Dr. Jack Kruse, a neurosurgeon with over 10,000 brain surgeries, sat across from Andrew Huberman, the Stanford neuroscientist whose podcast reaches millions of people every week. And within the first hour, Kruse told Huberman directly that he was part of the problem. By the end of this video, you're going to understand what Rubin witnessed that day, why it matters for your health, and the single moment where Huberman connected his own published research to a framework he'd never considered. That moment changes how you think about what's happening inside your brain right now. And here's the part that got me. Rick Rubin, the man who's watched creative genius unfold more times than anyone alive, said something about Kruse's anger toward Huberman that reframed the entire conversation. To understand what happened in that room, you need to understand Rick Rubin's superpower. It's not musical talent, it's pattern recognition across people. He describes himself as an invisible coach. He doesn't play instruments, he doesn't write lyrics. What he does is create the conditions where other people's genius can emerge. He sees what people can't see about themselves. And what Rubin saw in that room was something Kruse himself admitted. Rubin interrupted the conversation at one point and said something that stopped everything cold. He said the reason Kruse was so angry at Huberman was because Kruse was angry at himself before he understood what he now understands. Kruse confirmed it immediately. He said he sees his former self in Huberman. A brilliant scientist trapped inside a system that teaches incomplete truths. And the 18 months it took Kruse to unlearn everything he'd been taught were the hardest 18 months of his life. Think about that. A neurosurgeon who has performed over 10,000 brain surgeries through years of medical school and residency sat in front of a camera and said he couldn't believe how stupid he was to buy the line for 40 years. His words, not mine. That level of honesty from someone at that level of expertise should make you curious about what he found. But here's what makes Rubin's role so important. Rubin wasn't just hosting a conversation. He was doing what he's always done. He was creating the conditions for a breakthrough to happen in real time. And it did. But it didn't come from Kruse. It came from Huberman. Early in his career, before the podcast, before Stanford made him famous, Andrew Huberman studied cuttlefish. These are cephalopods, relatives of squid and octopi, and they do something no other creature on Earth does quite the same way. They display their neural activity as visible light patterns across their entire body. Waves of color ripple across their skin in real time. When a cuttlefish gets hungry, you can see it. When it's afraid, you can see it. When it's about to attack, the whole animal transforms. Huberman was fascinated by this because a cuttlefish is essentially a brain without a skull. When you watch one, you're watching thought itself expressed as light. During the podcast, Kruse was explaining how every cell in the human body emits ultraviolet light. He was describing how melanin acts as a screen that captures and displays this internal light show. And something clicked for Huberman. You could see it happen. He made the connection. Himself. Huberman said, and I'm paraphrasing, that what Kruse was describing, these waves of light inside our bodies, is exactly what he observed in cuttlefish. The difference is that cuttlefish display it externally. We have it happening internally, hidden behind our skulls. Kruse's response was immediate. He told Huberman that was the moment he knew Huberman finally understood. We are all cuttlefish. We just have an internal movie theater instead of an external display. The light show is happening inside you right now. You just can't see it because your skull is in the way. And that realization opened a door that Huberman couldn't close. I want you to pause on this for a second. If our cells are generating light internally and we have photoreceptors deep inside the brain where conventional teaching says light cannot reach, then either those photoreceptors are a mistake or cells are generating their own light for those receptors to detect. Nature doesn't build receivers for signals that don't exist. Your phone has a Wi-Fi antenna because Wi-Fi signals exist. Your eyes have photoreceptors because light exists. So why would your brain have light-sensitive proteins buried deep inside it, far from any external light source, unless there was light being generated internally for them to respond to? That's the question Huberman couldn't answer with his existing framework. And it's the question that should make you very curious about what came next. Here's where Rubin's role as the connector becomes critical. Rubin didn't just bring two scientists together, he brought together two people whose life experiences were mirror images of each other, and neither of them fully realized it. Rubin himself had lived the opposite of everything Kruse recommends. For decades, he was nocturnal. He wouldn't leave his house until 5 in the evening when the sun was setting. He'd come home as the sun was rising and sleep all day. He wore sunglasses constantly. He never saw a sunrise. This is the standard schedule of the music industry. And then Rubin needed open-heart surgery. Before the surgery, Rubin called Kruse. Kruse told him to ask his surgeon about running an intravenous drip of methylene blue during the operation. Kruse explained that the heart surgeon would be focused on the heart, but Kruse wanted to protect Rubin's brain during the hours he'd be under anesthesia. Methylene blue changes the oxidation state of iron, which helps regenerate melanin and protects the hydrogen bonding network in water throughout the brain. The surgeon refused. He said the reason his survival rates were 5 times better than anyone else's was because he did the procedure exactly the same way every time. Fair enough, but here's the twist. 6 months after the surgery, Rubin went on Peter Attia's podcast, and Attia, who had initially dismissed the methylene blue idea, told Rubin he'd been doing research. Turns out Kruse was right. It would have been beneficial. Rubin told this story with Huberman sitting right there, and you could see the gears turning. Now here's what most people missed about this conversation. Kruse wasn't trying to win an argument. He wasn't trying to embarrass Huberman. He said it plainly. He doesn't care about Huberman's podcast audience. That's not what motivates him. What Kruse cares about are the medical students at Stanford who listen to Huberman, the future doctors, the people who will treat your children and grandchildren. He looks at Huberman and sees a drumstick and 9-inch nails. How that drumstick hits the drum matters for millions of people downstream. Kruse used an analogy that I think is perfect. He compared himself to Albert Szent-Györgyi, the Nobel Prize winner who in 1941 stood in front of a room of students and said he believed all proteins in the human body might be semiconductors. Most people dismissed it. But one medical student in room, Robert O. Becker, took it seriously. 25 years later, Becker proved that bone is a semiconductor. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize 3 times. Kruse's message to Huberman was simple. You don't have to become me. You don't have to agree with everything I say. But if you stand in front of your students and say there's a possibility that we all have a cuttlefish-like light show happening inside our brains, one of those students might win a Nobel Prize for proving it. That's how science actually advances. Not by defending positions, by planting seeds. Here's a moment from the podcast that made the health and wellness world very uncomfortable. Kruse told Huberman directly that his supplement regimen was, in his words, a waste of time and money. Huberman takes 2 milligrams of melatonin every night. He's talked publicly about his extensive supplement stack. And Kruse's response was blunt. If your body makes it, you're not designed to take it. His analogy is perfect. Taking exogenous supplements of things your body produces naturally is like hiring someone at the gym to do push-ups for you and expecting to get stronger. Now, Kruse isn't saying supplements never have a place. He uses them therapeutically in specific situations. But as a lifestyle, he believes you're interfering with the photolithography, the light-based manufacturing process that your body uses to produce these compounds naturally. Huberman didn't argue, he listened. And that tells you something about the weight of what was being presented. There's a part of this conversation that went deeper than science. It went into something that most podcasts never touch. Rubin made an observation that seemed simple on the surface but carries enormous weight if you understand the framework being discussed. He said that even divorced couples remain entwined, not metaphorically. He meant terms of quantum coherence through water. Now, before you dismiss that, consider what Kruse explained about water earlier in the conversation. Your cells don't just contain water, they manufacture it. At cytochrome C oxidase, the final step of your mitochondrial electron transport chain, your body produces water with specific properties. This water changes its structure based on light exposure. It changes its bond angles, and it carries information. Kruse told a story that illustrates this in a way that's hard to forget. As a neurosurgeon, he's been involved in organ donation. A woman received a heart transplant and afterward developed an intense, unexplainable craving for McDonald's French fries. She had never eaten potatoes in her life. She had no way of knowing that the donor, an 18-year-old, had died at a McDonald's drive-thru with French fries in the seat next to him. Kruse said this has happened to him 3 times in his career. There's nothing in conventional medical textbooks that explains it. But if water carries information through quantum coherence and a transplanted heart brings its water chemistry with it, then the explanation isn't mystical, it's physical. Rubin understood this intuitively. He spent his career sensing things about people that can't be measured with instruments. What Kruse gave him was the science behind the intuition. Here's something practical from Rubin's own transformation. After years of living nocturnally, never seeing sunrise, wearing sunglasses constantly, Rick Rubin moved to Costa Rica, latitude 9 degrees from the equator. He now spends about 90 minutes outside every morning in direct sunlight. His description of the change is simple. He reversed the pattern that may have contributed to his cardiovascular problems. Melanopsin, the light-sensitive protein, exists in blood vessels. Rubin's cardiovascular system wasn't getting the light signals it needed for decades. You don't need to move to Costa Rica, but the principle is the same. Morning light exposure isn't optional. It's maintenance for a system that runs on light, and the man who produced some of the greatest albums in music history is now spending his mornings doing something far simpler than making records. He's watching the sunrise. Now step back and look at what Rubin actually orchestrated. He brought together a neurosurgeon who spent 18 months unlearning everything he was taught, and a neuroscientist who represents the current system. He created the conditions for a collision. And then he did what he always does. He observed. Rubin's insight about Kruse's anger is the key to understanding why this conversation matters. Kruse isn't angry at Huberman the person, he's angry at the system that produced both of them. A system where the chair of neurosurgery at the University of California, San Francisco, Eddie Chang, admits that 50% of medical textbooks are wrong, where Kruse believes the number is closer to 99%. But here's what gives me hope about this conversation. Huberman didn't get defensive. At multiple points, he said things like, "There's an of course bulb going off for me." He connected his own cuttlefish research to Kruse's framework without being told to. He admitted he didn't know that dopamine controls muscle fiber types. He acknowledged that melanopsin in the brain makes no sense under conventional teaching, but perfect sense if cells generate their own light. That is what scientific progress actually looks like. Not two people agreeing from the start, two people with different frameworks finding the overlap. And it took someone like Rubin, someone who isn't a scientist but who understands how breakthroughs happen, to create the space for it. Rubin said something in his book that applies perfectly here. The artist notices what no one else notices, but everyone can see. Kruse told Rubin he wants him to become a scientist. Kruse said he himself is a scientist learning to become an artist. They're meeting in the middle. And that middle ground is where the answers live. I want you to think about something, Kruse said openly, that he doesn't care about Huberman's podcast audience. He cares about the medical students at Stanford. He cares about the next generation of doctors. But here's the thing. You're part of this too. Every time you ask your doctor a better question, every time you bring up light exposure or circadian biology or mitochondrial function, you're doing what Kruse asked Huberman to do. You're planting a seed. Your doctor may not have the answer today. But if enough patients start asking about light, about circadian rhythms, about why these things are never measured or discussed, the system has to respond. That's how change happens. Not from the top down, from the curious up. Rick Rubin once said that his job isn't to make the music, it's to create the environment where the music can emerge. He's done this with hundreds of artists across every genre. He takes people who are stuck and helps them see what they couldn't see before. What happened on that podcast was the same process applied to science. Kruse came in with 40 years of frustration and a framework that connects quantum mechanics, semiconductor physics, evolutionary biology, and clinical medicine. Huberman came in with curiosity, a massive platform, and the humility to say, "I didn't know that," multiple times on camera. And Rubin sat between them and did what he does. He watched. He listened. He made one observation at exactly the right moment that reframed the entire dynamic from confrontation to collaboration. The result wasn't agreement on every point, it was something better. It was two brilliant minds finding unexpected common ground. Huberman's cuttlefish, Kruse's internal light show, Rubin's intuition that the anger was really grief for lost time. This is what happens when you put the right people in the right room with the right conditions. It's what Rubin has done his entire career. The difference is that this time the stakes aren't about making a great album, they're about understanding how the human body actually works. And here's what I think Rubin understood better than either scientist in that room. The breakthrough wasn't going to come from more data, it was going to come from connection. From one person seeing themselves in another person's work. From a cuttlefish researcher realizing that the light waves he studied in marine animals are the same light waves happening inside his own skull. That's not just science, that's art. And it took an artist to make it happen. So here's where we are. A music producer who never saw sunrise for 30 years needed open-heart surgery. A neurosurgeon who was 360 pounds discovered that light and cold could do what conventional medicine couldn't. And a Stanford neuroscientist connected his own published research on cuttlefish to a framework he'd never considered. Live on camera. Three very different people, three very different paths. One intersection point. Light. You deserve to know this story because it changes what's possible, not just for scientists or musicians or neurosurgeons. For you. The same biology that connects all three of them connects you. The same light show happening inside a cuttlefish is happening inside your brain right now. And the same simple interventions, morning sunlight, reduced artificial light at night, cold exposure, are available to every single person watching this. The next video in this series goes deeper into the water connection. How your mitochondria manufacture water with specific properties and why hydration is about far more than what you drink. Subscribe so you don't miss it.